Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Film Club podcast, where every month we pick a genre, an actor, a topic to explore, and in Anime Month, we're talking about...
Paprika. Not the spice, not the seasoning, but the movie.
Yes, Paprika, the 2006 psychological horror anime film, directed by Satoshi Kon. And we've talked about him before, when we talked about his first feature film, Perfect Blue.
That's right, and I ended up actually really liking Perfect Blue and wasn't sure what to expect coming into Paprika.
Yeah, what did you expect coming into Paprika?
I saw the trailer, and I was like, okay, this is very different from what Perfect Blue is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, you see the parade, and then you see, Paprika as basically a pixie.
The manic pixie dream girl trope.
So it's just like, yeah, I have absolutely no idea what I'm getting myself into, and once I got into it, I'm like, still wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah, this movie is a mind bender, and I don't want to call it like, oh, dude, this is just a mindfuck for 90 minutes, even though it's kind of what it is, but it's a really good, kind of artsy, like, psychological drama when you get to the heart of it.
It's a trip.
It's definitely a trip, yeah. But where do you want to get started? You want to talk about the movie a little bit? You want to talk about the director? You want to talk about anime?
Well, I think we should probably talk about the director, because this is by Satoshi Kon, and this was his last full feature film before he passed away in 2010.
Yeah, which is kind of fascinating, because we were talking about how long it took Miyazaki to get onto Howl's Moving Castle after Spirited Away.
Yeah.
And that was like a 3-year turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Satoshi Kon, I don't know everything about the man,
mm-hmm.
but he only made 4 feature films, and there were 2 like mini series he directed, like television shows. And it just strikes me as unusual he wasn't able to make more films in the time he was working. Because I think Perfect Blue came out in 96, 94?
Somewhere in there, yeah.
It came out in like the mid-90s. And so over a 10-year period, he only makes like 4 films. And after Paprika, he had 4 years before he passed. And I know he was working on another film called The Dream Machine.
Yeah, and I think he passed when there was only about 40% of the film done. So, but yeah, I think his movies have a lot that need to be animated in them. I mean, let alone the parade scene that we see. There is just so much to see.
So many visual elements to it. Also, the opening sequence of Paprika with all the editing and the cuts and how it all smooths together, and how you can tell there's not only a master animator but a master director involved in that sequence is so fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that's why he didn't have that many films under his belt, because it's just a lot of work to get a single scene done. And it's the same with Miyazaki. There is so much that goes in, and he, hand paints a lot of the scenes, so it's like it takes a lot of time to get to the final point that we get in this film, where I was pausing it just to see
just to explore the frames of this movie.
Yeah, because I was just like, there's so much to see, and it's moving so fast. And it's like, I'm sitting there with it paused, and I'm like, I'm discovering new things. Like, oh, wow, it's the frog band, and then we have the dolls, and then we have robots, and then we have the actual people on the street that are watching this.
Oh, God, and when they're in the movie theater, and they're pouring in through the background, and you're just, like, watching all these characters move around, and how they move is fascinating. Because it's such a dream world, dream logic going on. It almost reminds me of like kind of a David Lynch vibe to it, where everything is kind of makes perfect sense, only if you're a little bit crazy.
I mean, for me, it was kind of reminding me of Roger Rabbit, when Eddie goes into like the
Toontown,
into Toontown, and there's just so many different characters, and we're seeing all these characters that we've watched and loved, and they have their own personality and their own movements, and it's like, oh my God, it's like almost they're real, and that's how it feels in this movie, because
and it's almost too much to take in at once.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, and you see that on the characters' faces, where it's like, okay, the two worlds are kind of blending together.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that it's Satoshi Kon. He's a director that he was taken way too soon. Yeah. I think this guy had such talent in film. And it's fascinating because a lot of his movies deal with like psychology, questioning reality, and things like that. But this one was based on a novel of the same name. And it's really interesting to me because this movie still feels so uniquely him, even though it's based on an existing work. Because I know the main protagonist in the movie, or one of them, the detective.
Yeah.
He's original to the film. He's not in the novel at all.
Oh, okay.
Which also makes me feel kind of weird, because his story arc in the movie oddly reflects Satoshi Kon and his realization of his early death and all these things. This is a very oddly personal film if you look at it in that context.
And the fact that we get the detective as a filmmaker and he's being interviewed by Paprika.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so, he's taking, again, from his life of, okay, this is what it's like to be a director or writer, and going through the interview process of why I do things the way I do them, what makes me excited about filmmaking. And
the character of the detective, I'm sorry, I'll give you guys the character's actual name. Fuck, why is it so hard to find?
Detective Konakawa?
Thank you. Detective Konakawa, sorry. This is impossible for me to actually find these things written down. So yeah, Detective Konakawa, he is almost like a conduit for Satoshi Kon, because he wanted to be a filmmaker in college, but then his friend died, and then he decided not to... he wasn't able to finish his film.
Yeah.
So he became a police officer, like the role he played in the movie, and then it's a whole thing where all these subconscious things that happened to his past haunt him in the future, and he doesn't remember why, because they're so repressed memory.
Yeah.
And that's like a whole deal here. Satoshi Kon, he's a guy who talks a lot about memory and repression and all these other things. And he's just a very interesting filmmaker, and I really enjoy his movies.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of interesting, once we finally saw why the detective was so against the movie theater, and Paprika, well, you're dreaming about basically movie plots, but you're so anti-movie, and we kind of see it break down and why he's so against it. I don't know if you picked it up, but when we saw, clips of his own movie, I was thinking Point Break.
A little bit, yeah.
You have the cop and the best friend, and it goes back, from Point Break to Hot Fuzz, where, rolls on his back and Danny's just shooting into the because he just loves his friend so much he can't bring him to justice.
And now, talking about that, not only, it reminds me of, action movie, detective plot, stuff like that. What this movie reminds me of the most, and this is a little bit on the influence of the movie, this movie reminds me so much of Inception. And I know this is not a new take, but
considering that Inception took from this movie?
A lot from this movie.
Yeah.
Basically the whole baseline premise of Inception and Paprika are the exact same.
Yeah.
We have this machine that lets us enter into people's dreams, and we can manipulate their dreaming world, and it will affect their reality. And it is fascinating how Christopher Nolan did not get sued.
Yeah.
Because there are whole, visual sequences that are straight lifted.
I mean, there's a difference from people taking, the Akira slide and using that with their characters, and it's if you know when you see it.
Yeah, versus... and it's also a single, image that just looks fucking cool.
Yeah, of course. But then you get this movie where it's just oh yeah, this is the animated version of Inception. That's weird. Is there a correlation?
And then you see it, and then it's when Elliot Page taps the thing and the glass breaks in Inception, and then you're oh, that's a cool shot, I like that. And you watch Paprika and you're
there
wait
goes
a
Paprika,
minute.
Hitting basically just air, and then it breaks. And
it's the glass in the exact same shot. I think it's almost the exact same framing.
Yeah.
And it's it's never been acknowledged that that's where he got it from, but I'm that somebody owes somebody some fucking money.
I mean, he could have, Nolan could have gone to Satoshi Kon's people and been hey, I want to make a live...
an adaptation
live
of
adaptation, of this movie.
It's funny you say that, because they've been trying to get a live adaptation done of Paprika for years, but basically it's been radio silence for forever. It's a production hellscape. It's the same thing when people ask for the live action version of Cowboy Bebop, not realizing what that actually entailed. Oh my god, Netflix, why have you wronged me so? But that was in production hell for like 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, people asked for it, they wanted it. It was a popular cult thing, but you know,
I think it would
roiled forever.
I think it would be like people asking for like a live adaptation of Miyazaki film. It wouldn't work.
It would look weird, like the tone would be weird. And there's also certain things about animation that doesn't translate to live action.
I mean, there is a thing where Spirited Away has been turned into like a stage play.
Yeah.
And they've turned like Haku and the other creatures into like these live action puppets. And it's like, okay, you know, now that looks really cool. That looks like something that I would go pay and see because it just looks so accurate to the story.
Yeah.
But once you get it into like a movie, it's not going to have the same warmth and depth as some of these animated films have on their own.
And that gets into another thing. Sorry we're getting to a tangent, but it kind of relates to this because it's the artifice of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because in like theater, like there's an artifice to everything because we can all tell it's a stage and it is actors and the props are, you know, paper mache or whatever, puppetry. And it's a thing where you are giving into the imagination of the environment. You know, you are creating the world with the actors and it's like a communal experience, right?
Yeah, and it's also these actors that have this great talent that they could, you know, just basically bare their soul to this, you know, select audience and you feel connected.
Yeah, and that's the talent of being an actor.
Yeah.
But the thing is with film, and it's kind of like with dreams and the stuff that's going on here, because in like the film world, we're seeing a singular vision and interpretation of this world, and us as the audience is observing it.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's an artifice to it, because it's like you watch a movie, you know everything's, you know, fake, you know, it's all CGI or real movie magic. Or
what's
whatever.
in the frame is put there for a reason.
Yeah,
nothing extra,
and all that stuff. But it also really taints it because you are seeing a singular vision and you're not creating it communally as you would like a stage interpretation. And this is a whole thing where, you know, anime is, you know, film, like the film is made in an animated style. And it's like, this is a singular vision, Satoshi Kon's vision of the film, and adapting it to live action would lose a lot to it because anime just has different tropes. Like, it just works differently. You can't cut the same in live action as you can in anime. Like, the visual language just doesn't transfer.
I mean, the sequence alone with the guys jumping off the building.
Oh, that shit's cool as fuck.
It is, but it's like, you imagine the work that would take, you know, actual stunt, you know, coordinators and people and dancers to move in that way where they're all, you know, jumping off the roof in this, you know, really smooth movement.
And
it's
all
like,
the CGI that would go into it, and
exactly,
and
so
all the money that would have to be placed into it.
Versus, you know, where they could hand draw it and, you know, perfect it and really get it to where you want it to just meld into kind of like an ocean wave. That's kind of how they fall off the building.
Yeah.
A wave, or, you know, just wind going by.
A leaf on the wind.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, because Satoshi Kon, he wanted to be a live-action film director. He didn't want to be an anime director, but when he was getting stuff together for Perfect Blue, his first film, he realized it would just be cheaper to do all this stuff by drawing it, so I'll just do that. Again, I'm wondering, like, the universe we would be in if Satoshi Kon made, like, live-action films instead of animated films. I'm like, what weird, like, cinematic landscape would we be in? Because anime has traditionally just been, like, kind of relegated to, like, we'll give the Oscar to Miyazaki for his things, but, or like, Pixar or Disney. So, like, they're, like, you're not getting an Oscar for this. But if Satoshi Kon, if like, this movie came out as, like, a live-action film, this could win, like, festival awards and stuff for, like, you know, best film. I mean, I know this premiered at the Venice International Film Festival. Yeah,
and I think that it would probably do well as a live animated movie, a live action movie, but it's just, there's so much in this movie that it's like,
how the fuck would you do that?
You know, unlimited budget, you know, teams and teams of people that can animate and do CGI work versus people that are very incredibly talented in drawing and animating, it makes sense to have it animated.
Oh, yeah. Now let's actually talk about the anime. Let's actually talk about the film. So, Paprika, how would you describe this in your elevator pitch?
Inception, but animated.
Just make it easy.
Yes, with a good song in it. I don't know what the name of the song is. It like when she's free falling through the sky before she lands on the cloud. That song, I'm like, okay, that's kind of a banger. All right.
There is some banger stuff in this movie. This movie, okay, be real with me. The plot doesn't matter, right?
No, because you kind of fall into this movie the way you fall asleep. So it's like, it feels like you're supposed to feel like you're in a dream while watching this movie.
Yeah, and I say the plot doesn't matter because this movie's just an excuse to put cool shit on screen for 90 minutes.
And a parade that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the movie goes on.
Yes, and there are so many sequences in this movie that are not only just visually stunning, but incredibly well paced and incredibly well executed. What's your favorite single sequence in this movie? Because I have mine, and it is like the my favorite bait and switch I think I've seen in a long time.
It's gonna be difficult. I mean, it's so fresh for me. I just finished watching it a few hours ago, so
yes.
So it's very, very fresh today. But let's see. There's so much to choose, but I think it has to be the theater scenes.
Oh yeah, all the theater sequences.
Mm-hmm. Just seeing him, being very adverse to not going in, to finally him ripping through the screen to get to her. And I was just like, okay. I'm like, that kind of hits, a little bit.
Hit a little close to home.
It's like, ooh, I've stayed away from the movies, but I love her so much that I will not even think about it and I'll run through there.
Boo's a sucker for a good love story.
Exactly, even though he doesn't get the girl.
He gets the dream.
He gets the dream girl.
But, yeah, I like that. I like that answer. That's a good answer.
Thank you.
But no, my favorite is when they go to the apartment for the first time, because they're looking for the DC Mini, the dream machine, and all that stuff that lets them enter into, like, whatever. And she finds the ladder in the apartment, and she's like, goes down the ladder, and then she's suddenly in, like, an abandoned, carnival.
Yeah.
And she's like going around, and then she's like, oh, there's somebody on top of the Ferris wheel. And as she's going to hop over the railing, the whole like frame, like she jumps in and it's like a screen.
Yeah.
And it falls through, and then she realizes she's not jumping off, or she's not jumping over a railing, she's jumping off a balcony.
Yeah.
On like a 15th floor, and somebody catches her, and I'm like, oh my god, that imparted to me how dangerous this shit is, and also how creative this movie is gonna be. And also, it's just such a well executed, suspenseful moment.
Well, I mean, it also plays on the senses too, where you could be having such a vivid dream that you don't know you're asleep.
Yeah.
It takes, one little thing for you to be like, oh, okay, I'm actually sleeping right now. This isn't happening. I don't know if you're like that when you dream.
Oh, all the time. I'm one of the lucky few people that can have like lucid dreams pretty consistently, because like I don't know why, but I'm like very acute at figuring out when I'm like dreaming and when I'm like awake.
Yeah. I mean,
and as soon as I figure out I can dream, or I'm dreaming, I start flying around and doing cool shit.
Yeah, I mean, I can't do that in mine, but recently I was in my dreaming, but I was in my grandmother's house, and I didn't know I was asleep because this dream was so strong. And I remember at one point I grabbed the railing on the stairs, and it felt like I was holding on to a railing, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird. I'm back at the house, and it wasn't until I saw my uncle in a child form, from pictures that I've seen, I'm like, okay, I'm asleep. This isn't happening. Something's weird, but it's like, okay, but it's like I could, touch my surroundings, and I'm like, wow, I'm back, but I'm not questioning it. And that's how this movie is, where after a while, nobody knows if they're awake or they're asleep.
And that's like the beauty and also the creativity of the movie, because it's a very common thing with everybody. Everyone's had a dream that's so vivid they think it's real. And experiencing that, and then the movie is saying, okay, imagine everyone is having dreams that are so vivid they think they're real, and then imagine somebody else can control them, and the chaos that can ensue.
And not only that, they're manipulating you all to have the same dream.
then it's like this joint chaotic world and everything's merging together. And then it's like, well, if you can control each other's dreams, how much more can you control? How much more can you pass into somebody else in this dream world? And it's so cool. And as the movie goes on, is it just me, or were you losing track as to when the fuck they were awake?
Oh, definitely. Because, I mean, it's like, well, yeah, you know, the dream could make you think, yeah, sure, you know, they're at work the next day, we're moving on to the next series of problems, and it's like, well, no, maybe we're still in the same, you know, point of time, but the dream wants us to think that we're just moving in succession with every day. And that's what they're, you know, doing in the movie, where it's like, you know, she's still lying on the table asleep, and now the chief is asleep too, so it's like, well, what happens if she slips into a coma, he slips into a coma? Is the world just going to eat itself?
And then you're thinking, and it's like, wait a minute, are they asleep? Like, who's actually asleep? Is this another dream?
Mm-hmm.
And the movie is so good because it makes you question everything you're seeing. Is like, is this real? Is this what's actually going on? And it's the same thing with like any film, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're watching and it's like, okay, how much of this is like, you know, CGI bullshit, or how much of this is like real actors, or how much of this is like actually going on, and how much of this is like the artifice? And it's a very interesting and intelligent film. I really dig this movie.
Yeah. I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected I was going to, because just seeing the trailer from this and Perfect Blue, it's two very different worlds.
It's very different experiences.
So I wasn't sure. I'm like, okay, you know, light, kind of bubbly, you know, the parade in the street. I'm like, is that going to do it for me versus this, you know, psychological crime drama? And I was like, oh no, I'm like, this was really, really cool.
Yeah. And, God, I really want to do more Satoshi Kon movies. Yeah. I mean, we only got to get through 2 more. We got the whole discography.
Yeah.
But yeah, where do you want to jump to now? I know we didn't, like, do a plot drop of this movie, but honestly,
it's kind of hard to do a plot drop for this movie.
I would just recommend people watch it.
Yeah, watch it, experience it. I mean, I watched it without the phone because there's just so much going on that you have to pay attention.
It does take a lot to get you off your phone to watch the movies.
It does, and it was hard because you were texting me while I was watching the movie. But,
it happens.
But let's see.
To Kill a Mockingbird couldn't do this to her, but Paprika could.
Because I've watched To Kill a Mockingbird a bunch of times. I know what happens. I've read the book.
Ooh, you can read. How fancy.
Be jealous. But I think we should probably talk about our lead character, Paprika.
Yeah, and Paprika's weird because she is the definition of the manic pixie dream girl.
Yeah.
And what Paprika is the alter ego of Dr. Chiba, and she's both the exact opposite of
Chiba,
of Dr. Chiba, but also all of her like inner being all at the same time. It's really weird.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of like, okay, I'm like, is Paprika just jumping into her body? Because we see that whole sequence of her, you know, jumping into posters and different things.
And when she's running places, Paprika just kind of appears in reflections and they kind of interact with each other. Yeah,
so it's like, so is, you know, Paprika just hitching a ride to her, or are they actually the same person? And that's when we see they are the same person, but they're basically two entities.
Yeah, and it makes me think a lot, because Dr. Chiba is very, like, reserved and, like...
No emotion,
very cold, you know, intellectual. And Paprika is this really, like, bubbly, really, like, the exact opposite.
Yeah.
You know, fun, she's, like, really warm and kind and all these other things. And it's, like, that's exactly the kind of person you would put into an environment, like a dream, right? Mm-hmm. Where, because the whole point of these dream machines is for, like, therapy, right?
Yeah.
For these people to impart their subconscious mind to somebody else. Yeah. And Paprika is, you know, the most comforting thing that these, you know, middle-aged men can come up with to interact with. And Dr. Shiba's it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I know I just kind of rambled there.
I know. And it's interesting to see, you know, the reason that this machine was created was so that this best friend could basically jump into his best friend's dreams and see what's bothering him or what he wants to do with his life and how to kind of help him achieve what he's dreaming about. And it's just like, okay, so it's like, it's a simplistic idea for this creation where you know that if it gets into the wrong hands, it could cause all-out chaos, which it does.
Yeah, like, almost immediately. And that's the whole thing of the movie, right? It's basically a mystery, who stole the dream machine.
Mm-hmm.
But the main conceit of the movie, who stole the dream machine, is the least interesting part of the whole movie.
Yeah.
Because you're more interested in why is the detective, like, so traumatized? What's his dream mean? Mm-hmm. How is Paprika able to navigate these worlds? And, like, what really is Paprika? Is she a split personality of Dr. Shiba? Is she, like, the repressed superego? Is she a symbol of all the things Dr. Shiba wishes she could be and is unable to in reality?
Yeah, because you see it in the beginning of the movie. They're blaming Paprika for stealing this dream machine, basically. And it's like, once you see her as a character, it's like, well, why would she steal it? She's basically, an entity in dreams.
And that's the other thing. They're accusing Paprika of stealing it, not Dr. Shiba. Paprika doesn't exist. Paprika is a thing that exists only in the dream form.
Yeah.
But they never accuse Dr. Shiba, just Paprika.
Mm-hmm.
So is there an implication that Paprika is another entity that Dr. Shiba created and is just housing there?
Well, I mean, we see it at the end of the movie where the two separate. And it's just, Dr. Shiba telling her, like, well, what are you doing here? And she's like, don't we have bigger problems to worry about? Let's, think about it later. So you see the two together, so it's basically like having an imaginary friend come to life.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. It's how your imagination manifests.
Yeah.
And most people's manifestations of their imagination is within their dreams. It's the most raw form of your imagination. It's just the weird subconscious things that your brain comes up with when you sleep.
Yeah, and that's why when Dr. Shiva gets so upset that, I can't think of the creator's name, when he gets stuck in the robot form.
Oh, yeah, that's Dr. Tokita?
Yeah, I think so. That was him. They're trying to flee to figure out a way to stop the chairman. And she's like, no, I've got to save him. And she's getting upset, and, Paprika's like, why? Just say the word, say, why. And she doesn't say it, but she runs to help him, and she's kind of like, she's finally letting her inner self out, her true form out. So it's like Paprika's been on the other side kind of pushing her, hey, stop being this cold person on the outside and actually let people see who you are on the inside.
This is just such a nice movie.
Yeah.
Even though it ends with a giant, like, Attack on Titan naked body monster fight in Tokyo.
Yeah, that was weird.
See, that's the thing. Every time I think about this movie, I'm like, man, this is a deep, cool movie. And then I'm like, man, but that ending's just a Godzilla fight. Man, this movie's kind of fucking awesome.
I mean, it's weird when they have her on the table, basically half paprika, half butterfly.
Oh, and the guy shoves his hand inside of her and then, like, rips her open like a Reese's, or rips her open like a candy wrapper, and then it's like Dr. Chiba's inside, and it's like really weird imagery.
I mean, it's even the same with the parade when they're walking and you see the girls like in the Sailor Moon tops and they lift up their skirts and the guys are basically camera phone heads and they're taking pictures. I'm like,
they slide into those DMs so
like,
hard.
What is happening?
Yes,
there are so many weird, kind of like, what?
It's all these visual things that are like, you can read so much into that, like that specifically. Yeah. You can read so much into all these visual elements, all these like visual cues, all the language of the film. This is a very dense movie. I really like this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, getting the grand reveal that the chairman of the company is the reason why
the DC Mini is stolen because he's paralyzed, like he's stuck in a wheelchair, and he's an older guy, and he's like, I know my time has come, but in the dreams I could be anything.
Yeah.
And with the DC Mini, I can be anyone. And he's looking to basically go completely into the dream world and inhabit another person, like the Vulcan mind meld or whatever. And it's such a hand wavy we're a sci-fi movie, it's a big bad evil guy in the wheelchair. He did it, obviously, and it's not. I'm not saying it's a cop out, but it's like, oh yeah, of course that's what happened.
mean, he's bald. He's in the wheelchair. Kind of looks like...
He's not Dr. Xavier.
Kind of look like it.
He's not Dr. X.
Although
right?
I will give it...
Professor X.
I will give it to him. He did have a cool office.
He did have a cool office.
All the plants, the books. I mean, even where he's sitting at his desk and he's got the books behind him and just the shading, the dappled lighting over his face with the plants. I'm like, that's beautiful, and this is animated.
They drew that.
It's like, it's not, someone set up the lighting to make it look this way. It's like, they did that in, in art form. I'm like, that is so cool.
They're like, they drew that.
They drew that with a pencil.
But yeah. Anything else, Boo?
I mean, I feel like we could go on and on about this movie because there's just so much.
There is a lot of this movie.
The creepy doll.
There's a lot of creepy dolls in this movie.
But the main one, the one that,
That creepy doll.
That creepy doll, the one that is sitting in the theme park, the one that she's talking on the float.
It's unnerving.
And then, she shows up bigger than the building.
There is some horror movie shit going on in this movie.
Yeah. Are you okay?
Yeah, I just really like this movie. All right, everybody. But yeah, so that is Paprika.
That is. And that means since this week's over...
We're going on to next week.
We're going on to next week, which is our final week of Anime Month.
Yes. And this month we've talked about Miyazaki films. We've talked about incredibly influential films like Akira. We talked about incredibly artistic films like Paprika. And now we're going to do the shameless media tie-in films. This is a movie that is based on a manga series that is also an anime series that I love tremendously. And
I feel tremendously isn't a strong enough word for you.
Oh, I will go in deep into my maximum tisms as to how deep I'm into this series.
Should I show people on Instagram how many books you have in this collection?
I'm not even caught up. But, yeah, it's going to be about Case Closed, or Detective Conan, known internationally. And it is going to be the first Case Closed movie, the Time Bomb Skyscraper. And I'm pretty sure that's the name. There's like 20 of the Case Closed movies, so you'd be lucky I'm giving you that one.
Just send me the link and we'll be good.
Oh, yeah. And I'm excited to talk about it. This is just my excuse to talk about Case Closed, because I love that series. It's going to be great.
All right. Well, be prepared for Case Closed next week. But if you want to listen to us on a different platform than you currently are, you can find us on Anchor FM, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Yeah, you go to our YouTube channel, The Film Vault. That's The Film Vault on YouTube, where you can, watch some slideshows that are our podcast. You can listen to a lot of our podcasts on there. We document everything on there, and yeah.
And if you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Instagram at The Film Club Podcast. And with that...
see you next week at the Film Club.
Peace.